Today I'm going to talk about one of the greatest frauds in history, how a teenager swindled Wall Street and many investors alike and became worth $100 million at age 21. This is the story of Barry Minko and Z-Best. Barry Minko was born in 1966 and grew up in the San Fernando Valley. His parents owned a carpet cleaning shop, and while they couldn't afford a babysitter, young Barry often worked at the shop and cleaned carpets by age 10. While in high school, he saved enough money to start his own business, and in 1982, Barry Minko founded Z-Best Carpet Cleaning Service in his parents' garage when he was 15 years old, and his motto was "The sky's the limit."
Is the stain gone?
Stain's not gone.
Is the stain gone?
Stain's not gone.
Is the stain gone?
Stain's gone.
If you're tired of going through the same problems every time you want your carpets cleaned, it's time you called us. I'm Barry Minko, president of Z-Best Carpet Cleaning. We clean carpets with such care, I'll guarantee the work and our price in writing.
And out of all successful businesses to start from a garage, Z-Best was unique because it made almost all of its money illegally. The carpet cleaning industry had legitimate businesses, but it also attracted a lot of shady ones as well because it required almost no licenses and very little startup capital. Business was performing poorly for Z-Best, and their services often received complaints from customers, and Minko was under immense pressure to pay back his suppliers and make payroll for his workers. So he turned to financing his business through criminal acts. Starting small, he began check kiting to make short-term payments. This is a process that consists of writing a check from a bank account with insufficient funds and then depositing it into another account, then withdrawing it before the original check is cleared. This is a scheme that has mostly died out today due to electronic banking and check processing being a lot faster. For Minko, his first check kiting incident was only for a few $100s, but it only got easier for him to commit crime from here. As you'll eventually see, he will dig himself into a deeper and deeper hole. He began overcharging his customers if they paid by credit card in hopes that the people would pay the inflated price to boost funds, and would only sometimes pay back if they disputed the charge, including one LA woman who he refused to pay back, but we'll get back to her later. While bringing in funds that were primarily illegal, the company still struggled. Minko even stole jewelry from his own grandmother when he was unable to make payments. He racked up over $70,000 in fraudulent credit card charges for carpet cleaning services. Struggling to stay afloat, Minko decided to expand Z-Best's efforts beyond carpet cleaning and to insurance restoration. In order to move forward with this scheme, Minko and new associate Tom Paget launched fictitious insurance restoration and appraisal business called Interstate Appraisal Services. Minko and associate Tom Paget conspired to use Interstate Appraisal Services as a source to verify fraudulent claims for Z-Best doing restoration work, establishing a front for a Ponzi scheme. Minko counted his accounts receivable for work under contract from fake companies that he made up, and also supplied fake insurance documents and financial statements that allowed him to borrow significant amounts from banks, believing this work was legitimate.
What I did was I created false vendors like Marble Marketing or Tough Techs, and created invoices and created literal front companies who I could show money going to.
Eventually, restoration work accounted for 86% of Z-Best's revenue, but it was entirely fraudulent. Z-Best's high earnings from these projects attracted interest from investors. So needing to raise more funding, he decided to take Z-Best public. The company who audited Z-Best prior to its IPO audit did not visit the restoration site, because if they did, they would have seen that they were just mailboxes, and the jig would have been up right away. Riding the wave of his seemingly booming insurance restoration business, accountants inspecting the company's operations for the IPO wanted to see a restoration project in action. Z-Best then rented several office spaces and took accountants and auditors from Ernst & Winnie, now Ernst & Young, to a building and dressed up several floors to look like they had been restored, and made over 22,000 fake documents to convince them that they were running a legitimate operation.
Minko found a brand new building in Sacramento, paid off a guard, and brought the auditors in on a Saturday morning.
We'd give the guard $50 to recognize us. We'd bring the auditors in. They'd say, "Hi." And we'd walk up and say, "Yeah, we just did all this." We'd put signs about Z-Best. It was like a Hollywood production.
The accountants closed the IPO, and Minko was the youngest company CEO to reach an IPO at the time. ZBest went public officially in 1986 and traded on the NASDAQ, and 1 year later, Minko's stake in ZBest was worth over $100 million, and he was only 21 years old. This catapulted him to become Wall Street's newest success story, garnering recognition from people everywhere.
Think big, be big.
Really?
End of story.
Minko had originally planned to use the money funded through the IPO and selling of stock to pay off all the debts that he owed, but the SEC prohibited officers from selling shares within 2 years of a company's IPO. Cash problems for ZBest only continued since most of the revenue was fabricated, and in response to this, Minko planned to acquire KeyServe, who was the authorized carpet cleaner for Sears. Remember them? And this acquisition would provide enough cash flow to ultimately end the Ponzi scheme. However, remember the woman that Minko never paid back? Well, after finding that she, along with many other ZBest customers, were overcharged, she became very curious as to why such a successful business had to resort to credit card fraud to make money.
As he became the boy wonder, people who he had scammed in these petty minor ways started to make some noise.
Her realization sparked a campaign against ZBest that would end up exposing their fraud. She collected evidence that ended up in an article in the LA Times, and once it was published, the stock price for ZBest instantly plummeted. And more lenders grew concerned with these findings and began to investigate deeper to uncover the entire Ponzi scheme and the fraudulent companies that ZBest had done business with. This exposure dominoed into the public finding out about all of their fraudulent actions, which was even more than previously expected. It is estimated that investors and creditors lost over $100 million from this. It was also discovered that ZBest laundered money that was earned from the mob and drug trafficking as well. Minko was convicted of not one, not two, I'll save you some time, 57 counts of securities fraud, bank fraud, mail fraud, tax evasion, racketeering, money laundering, and embezzlement. He really wasn't kidding when he said the sky was the limit. In 1988, he was sentenced to 25 years in prison and required to make restitution of $26 million.
They feed me Thanksgiving dinner through a hole in the door, and they nuke it. I look at the nuked Jell-O, I look at the toilet, I look at the door that don't open, and I'm thinking, you know, maybe it's me. Maybe there's something wrong with me. Maybe when they go to all this trouble to put you in a place like this, you better do some changing.
While in prison, he became a born-again Christian and earned his bachelor and master's correspondence school degrees. He served his sentence until an early release in 1994. Upon his release, he became a pastor at Community Bible Church in San Diego. Using his skills for good now, he founded the Fraud Discovery Institute, which helped expose many companies of fraud, even working undercover with the FBI, proving it really does take one to know one.
You can take what you used to use for evil and manipulative reasons and to hurt people and use those same talents and abilities to help them. And I believe people can change.
So it's fair to say the story ended up with a happy ending, as he really did turn his life around. However, once a fraud, always a fraud. While working with the Fraud Discovery Institute, Minko falsely accused Lennar, a construction and real estate company, of being a massive Ponzi scheme and having supposedly unearthed evidence of fraud himself. Conveniently, he also bought $20,000 worth of stock options right around this time. The issue was, there was no fraud happening with Lennar, and he profited off of shorting the stock, and Lennar lost over $400 million in value. So Minko's actions put him back in jail. After this, he was sentenced for 5 years after a guilty plea for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and was ordered to pay over $580 million in restitution. But it doesn't end there. In 2014, he pleaded guilty for stealing more than $3 million from the church where he had been pastor for over 10 years.
We're not a TV ministry. We don't say, if you don't send me money, I'm going to die. It's not that kind of ministry at all.
But it actually was. Minko opened unauthorized church bank accounts and directed the funds back to his own accounts for personal use, not to mention concealing income from the IRS and evading taxes. He even tricked a widower to donate $75,000 for a hospital he was building in Sudan, persuading him to do it in honor of his late wife who passed from cancer. However, there was no hospital, and Minko pocketed the money. He was convicted for counts of conspiracy to commit bank fraud, wire fraud, mail fraud, and to defraud the federal government. Is the stain on Barry's reputation gone?
Stain's not gone.
In conclusion, Minko, who started off as an ambitious businessman, failed to use his efforts to make a successful business and worked tirelessly to instead cover up his infamous grand scheme. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something.
He's just another con man sitting on a hill. You see him at the bullfight, closest to the kill. Lives up in a tower, sells dreams to the poor. No matter how he gets on.